Hey, hi, hello, how are you? I'm Pia and today we're doing my March wrap-up. In the month of March, I have no idea how many books I read, but I read a lot of books that I don't own, which is why my stack is so small in the thumbnail. I was in a big reading mood. I still am, and I'm just kind of flying through titles right now. The first book that I finished during the month of March is The Prince by Machiavelli. This is a book that I read for school for my great books class. It's a little pocket-sized little like handbook on how to be a good prince or how to be a successful prince. If you're new to my channel, I typically don't rate books for school, so I didn't give this a rating. It was interesting. Next up, I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a classic. Like, you should know this by now. This is about a doctor who tries to create a human, and what he makes ends up being a sort of monster. He tries to get rid of him, but he causes some sort of damage. And it's really good. I really like this book. This is actually a book I read on my own. I really loved it. I think that the commentary on society and human nature, you know, what makes us human, is really interesting and really thought-provoking. There is so much said by the monster, which has you kind of questioning your beliefs. I really like this book. With that being said, it's a very short book. However, I found it kind of repetitive, which is kind of strange. But I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, and today's emoji book rating is going to be the little like crystal ball, because I really enjoyed this book. I think this is a contemporary that is worth checking out. Next up, I read one of my absolute favorite books of the month, and that is Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. This is a book that recently got adapted into a movie from Disney Plus, and so I was really excited to pick up the book and then watch the movie. I absolutely adored this book. This is about a girl named Stargirl who's a little eccentric, a little different, and she has been homeschooled her whole life, and she decides to start public school, and she's a sophomore. World and the school kind of turn upside down because she's there. She brings a positive light. She's incredibly kind and giving and selfless. A lot of good things start happening, but obviously some bad things start happening. She kind of has to question her identity, or whether she wants to be the person that she wants to be or the person that other people want her to be. I really like this. It's a very good like commentary on like self-discovery and identity and coming of age and those things. It also has a cute little romance. What else do I have to say about it? It's a great book. If you guys like Anne of Green Gables, this to me is like a perfect modern retelling of it in a way, just because of the main characters are so similar. Anne and Stargirl, I think, are just like would be kindred spirits, and I love them so much. I have a couple gripes, even though I really love this book. It is written from the perspective of Leo, who is obviously the first character we meet, like the main character. Because of that, Stargirl's kind of at an arm's length. It could kind of get very tropey in the like manic pixie dream girl, like she's not like other girls, that sort of stuff. If you look past it, I mean, it came out in 2005. There's not like, too much of that. It's just like if you really try to analyze her character, you don't have the most character development. But it's a middle grade, or it's a young adult. I call it a middle grade. Like they're in high school, so I guess it's technically young adult. I love this book. Can you tell? I give it 5 out of 5 stars. This is a new favorite. I need to own it for myself and then just reread it and annotate it. Next up, I finished The Handmaid's Tale. These are all like shiny books. Kind of annoying to me and you. So I finished this book. It took me a very long time to read it. This is called Pia Read a Lot of Classics this month, and unfortunately didn't enjoy all of them. And The Handmaid's Tale is an example of that. I thought that the plot was intriguing, but it didn't go farther than that. You know, I was enjoying the things that were happening. Kind of caught me off guard, some of the things. Overall, I just didn't find an interest in this book. I really didn't see it as gripping or one that I kept wanting to pick up. I thought it was a little confusing at times with the way the narrative is written. It has flashbacks and then obviously the regular timeline. Those aren't really distinguished because it's kind of like a stream of consciousness style of writing. That's my opinion on The Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood did great things for feminism, great things for the sci-fi genre, and great things for our society and just in general to consider these questions that she poses in this book. However, I just didn't really enjoy this book, so I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read another middle grade book. This was like the month of classics and middle grade, I swear. I read a book called Hurricane Child by Karen Callender, and this is a new middle grade. It's very short, and I've heard good things about it, so I've decided to pick it up from my library. This is a book centering around a girl whose mother like missing or like just not in her life. She lives with her dad, and they live on this kind of like remote island. She's facing a lot of discrimination in class, she's getting bullied, and she's also discovering her interest in other girls as a 12-year-old. So that representation was really interesting. I just felt like this book didn't really know what its point was. I think that there were like a little too many side plots, and it was trying to tackle tackle a lot of things. This tried to tackle like depression and suicide, which I felt were not handled in the right way because they were kind of brushed over and were like, oh yeah, like I don't want to spoil it, but they weren't handled in the way that I wish they were. And I think that if you're gonna broach such difficult subject matters in a middle grade, you want to make sure that they are well explained and don't leave any questions behind. I didn't really enjoy that. I just thought that this plot was not confusing in the way that like I didn't understand what was going on, but confusing in the way that I didn't understand why so many different things were happening. There were so many different side plots and so many different like twists and turns. However, the twists and turns were super predictable, super tropey. This is a book that came out recently and I was quite disappointed with the reveals and things like that because I was just like, this is something I've seen done a million times, so I didn't really enjoy that much. Honestly, this was just a book that didn't stand out a lot to me. I thought it was going to be an interesting premise, especially seeing a middle grade about someone discovering their sexuality really early in life. I thought that was interesting, but I just really didn't enjoy this book. I didn't think it tackled anything super effectively because it was trying to do too many things. So I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not my favorite middle grade that I read this month. And obviously because I read Stargirl like I think a week before I read this book, I read Love Stargirl, which is the sequel to Stargirl. This is actually from Stargirl's perspective and it follows the aftermath of the first book. And we're introduced to some new characters and some new sides of Stargirl. I really liked this book because of its character development for Stargirl. Obviously, like I said before, in the first book, there really isn't a lot of character development for her just because she's not the person telling the story, I think, or just because we didn't really get to know her too much in the book. But we get to see a lot of different sides of her in this book and I really enjoyed that about it. Again, it was a little bit tropey and I don't think it was as enjoyable as the first book, but I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. I think that if you liked Stargirl, then you should read this book because my favorite character was Stargirl, so I get to see her again. The only other thing that bothered me about this being a sequel and this being a duology was that, so the first book ends on kind of a cliffhanger. It's a mystery, it's open-ended, and I love open-ended endings. I think that because this is a duology and because a second book came out, there should have been some kind of closure for the reader in the second book, just because there are 2 books rather than just one. That was one gripe I had with this book because it did leave off again open-ended. Next up, I read another middle grade. Are we surprised at this point? I read a book called Other Words for Home, and this is by Jasmine Warga. This is a book entirely told in verse. It's about a girl and her mother who move to the United States from Syria, them adjusting to American life and trying to keep hold of their roots and also keeping connections back in Syria. That is a big whole thing. It's about discrimination, it's about prejudice and things like that, which I really enjoyed seeing in a middle grade platform. There's a book that's entirely told in verse as well, and that's kind of one of my problems with it. I love free verse, I love reading poetry. If you choose this way to write a book entirely in verse, I felt like you should have been getting something more out of the style in which you chose to write. So I felt like that the style of the book should have added to the general feeling of the book and should have added something, or else it was just kind of pointless and you really just like should have written it in prose, or it just kind of felt like prose and not claiming that it was in verse. I did give this 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was enjoyable. I thought it was an important story that needed to be told, especially for young kids and refugees and people who are not from America, and to know that they all should be accepted and should be treated as equals. This is like the biggest underdog in the entire world. I read Great Expectations. I read this for my AP English class. I read most of this in a day, which was so stressful. I don't recommend waiting until the last day to read your book, and I kind of liked it. This centers around a kid named Pip who has great expectations. He comes from commonplace. He gets an opportunity to with a kind of estranged old rich woman, like hang out with her a little bit. And there he meets her daughter Estella and falls madly in love. So from then on he vows that he wants to be a gentleman. So some random donor donates him all this money and it's like, hey, you're gonna be a gentleman, and no one's telling him who donated the money. He just goes on to learn as much as he can, dress formally, try to get a good job, and try to impress Estella. So there's twists and turns, there's friendship and foes, there's love and romance and heartbreak, but I kind of liked it. Like, I feel like I might have liked Oliver Twist, but I read that 5 years ago, so I don't really remember. I kind of liked it. So like, is this a good classic? Like, I feel like it is. Next up, I read The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gamenhart. This is another quirky main character. We've got a girl named Coyote Sunrise. We love funky names in this household, and she lives with her dad on the road. They're constantly traveling. They've been traveling for the last 5 years. Pick up people sometimes and help them drive places. So this is basically centering around her as she kind of dealing with the fact that she's only family on the road. She starts getting a little homesick, and some things are starting to happen to her old town she really misses. It's her journey trying to get back home while all odds are against her, meeting friends along the way and people who help her out. So this is dealing a lot with grief because the catalyst to them moving to only be on the road all the time is that the main character's mom and 2 sisters died in a car accident. A very, very interesting story, and I really love this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I was intrigued. I started crying at one point. It was heartwarming. It was heart-wrenching. It was fantastic, and I love this book, and I love middle grade, especially ones that deal with grief and friendship and family, like at the forefront of a story, are like my favorite things. Throw in some hard-hitting elements, and it's just fantastic, and like a quirky, eccentric cast of characters. Like, you've got my perfect book. The last classic that I read for this month was My Antonia by Willa Cather. This is a book told from Jim's perspective, who meets a girl named Antonia from Bohemia. About their story, he kind of loves her for like his entire life and like doesn't say anything about, well, he kind of says anything about it, but like it's like their chance meetings, their lives going separate ways, and then like meeting again like every 20 years. I think it's really interesting. This is a lot like Stargirl in a weird way. Kind of like this girl who brings something out of the main character and brings out their personality and the best of them. So I really liked that. I liked Antonia's character. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. This isn't my new favorite classic, but it isn't one that I hated. Intriguing and interesting, however, I didn't feel like I constantly wanted to pick it up. However, I loved the writing in this book. I loved the flowery, metaphorical prose, and I thought it was gorgeous. The last book I read is maybe hands down my favorite book I read this month. If you know anything about me, you would know that I have been reading a big ass book for a year, over a year. I started this book on audio. I've just been reading it on audio. It's like my loans have been expiring left and right, and I just like finally got down and finished this book. Finished the last 20% that I had. Who would I put a year of effort into? Grant. I love Grant. This is Grant by Ron Chernow. He wrote Alexander Hamilton in Washington. He's a big guy for, I was gonna say presidents, but Alexander Hamilton's not a president. This is a chunky monkey. This is a book that I enjoyed to no end. I love Ulysses S. Grant. He's my favorite president. He is a fantastic guy. I really love him because he's like so chummy, and basically just because he was like a normal guy and just was a little bit gullible but was always loyal. So I really liked this book because I didn't feel like I was reading a textbook, because I mean this could put anyone off. And because I'm an avid reader of fiction, this was something that I think is a little daunting and scary, but I loved it. I thought that it was really told in a kind of narrative way, and it wasn't like he did this, then he did that, and signed that act. All that he was feeling, all that was said in their memoirs, you really felt immersed into the time period and into Grant's life and his head. I loved it so much. I give this 5 out of 5 stars. I love Grant. Will I ever reread this? Maybe. Like if I'm ever just like sad, I'll probably read bits of it because I just love him. Anyway guys, those are all the books that I read in March. I don't know how many that is. I'll count it for you. I read 11 books. That's better than I've been doing, and I'm very proud of myself. Let me know what you guys read during the month of March, what you guys have been doing, what you're reading right now, what you're planning to read in April. My April TBR will be up at some point soon. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!